Welcome back. Today, we're going to glance over the graphical settings of Satisfactory, what effects they have on the game, and test the graphical presets with my setup, to see how each preset holds up framerate wise. Knowing all that, let's start with the settings themselves. This section is simply about testing out each setting, what it changes, and how much it affects FPS. First option we can change is the weirdly named full screen option. Here we have three options to choose from: windowed, borderless window, and full screen. It doesn't change anything about how the game looks, but it gives you the choice between being able to alt-tab easily out of the game or gain slightly more FPS. At least that's how it is normally, but in this game, performance is same across all of the options. So performance-wise, it doesn't matter which one you choose. But for the rest of the testing, I'm choosing full screen. The next setting is Graphics API. You can choose DirectX 11, DirectX 12, and even Vulkan. It looks like all of the graphical effects look the same on all of the APIs. Surprisingly, even Lumen works in DirectX 11. So the choice is based around performance, and in my testing, DirectX 11 performed the best out of the trio. It did have two big stutters while traversing the world, but it was otherwise stable. DirectX 12 was the slowest, but it never stuttered or had any issues, unlike the other two APIs. While Vulkan performed marginally better than DirectX 12, it was stuttery and in some instances unplayable. However, it dawned on me that Vulkan might be compiling shaders on the fly, which would explain the poor performance and stuttering. So I did a second run and it was completely fine. What didn't change after the second run was the high CPU usage, which was the worst one of the bunch. So, if you don't mind the occasional hiccups, DirectX 11 gives you the highest frame rate. If you want a stable experience, then go with DirectX 12. Though, we will return to this later on, where I'll test all of the presets with different APIs. During this showcase, however, I'll be using DirectX 12. Moving on to the Performance and Graphics Quality tab, texture quality doesn't seem to affect much. Like with Helldivers 2, it seems to use the highest quality version of textures all the time, unaffected by the chosen option. The only difference here I noticed is that the lower settings try to stream the textures as much as possible, instead of keeping them in memory all of the time. This causes texture pop-in to be more noticeable. In my case, however, it doesn't change the performance at all, so I would just keep it at Ultra. The next setting on the list is shadow quality. When set to low, it completely disables shadows. I should also mention that contact shadows will also disappear, even when enabled. Stepping it up to medium enables hard shadows, which currently seem to be slightly broken. The high setting makes them soft, and ultra makes them even more precise. Personally, I would avoid the low setting and stick with the high setting. If you have the headroom, then go with the ultra setting. Post-processing changes the quality of effects like bloom, vignette, motion blur, and God rays. Setting it to low removes every effect that I just mentioned, except bloom and lens flares. Motion blur doesn't work in this case even if it's turned on. Setting it to medium adds a vignette and slightly alters how bloom works. It also enables motion blur. High adds God rays and slightly improves the quality of motion blur. Ultra only seems to again improve upon motion blur. Overall, since it has such a small impact on performance, you can set this setting to Ultra. The anti-aliasing setting seems to be currently broken because no matter what I choose, it doesn't change anything visually or performance-wise. Even with the different AA methods, it doesn't do anything, so it doesn't matter which one you choose. Foliage load distance changes how much grass and shrubbery is loaded at different distances. It's tied with the option view distance, so if you don't see much of a difference in your game, check that setting first. With such a small difference in performance, I suggest just putting it to Ultra. The VFX quality setting seems to change a lot more than just particles. It seems to change how some materials look, and it also adds SSR to reflective surfaces. Set to low, materials are simpler, for reflections only cube maps are present, and particles are sparse and simple. Stepping up to medium changes a lot of things. For instance, materials like glass receive nice shaders and look a lot better. Cube maps are now accompanied by SSR, and particles are now more complex, like with this miner where flying rocks and dust are present. The high setting seems to add even more particles, like the embers flying from the chimney and more debris in the air. Ultra seems to only make the particle count higher. Again, like with most of the settings, Ultra seems to be a no-brainer. Foliage quality is tied to foliage load distance and view distance. From what I can tell, it affects how dense the closest grass patches are. It has a pretty small performance hit, so I suggest to sticking to Ultra. Lighting quality works exactly as described. It changes how many lights can be rendered at the same time. It's important to mention that not all lights are equal. This setting doesn't affect flashlights or these types of emissive lights, only lights made by lamps. It also doesn't affect the distance these lights are rendered at, so the cutoff distance is the same all across the preset. This setting can be extremely heavy when all of the lights are visible, so I suggest sticking to low or medium. Of course, if you set it to Ultra and use a normal amount of light, then the performance will be the same as with the low preset. View distance sets the distance for objects to be rendered at, but also sets the distance for LODs. As mentioned previously, it changes the behavior of other settings as well, specifically foliage load distance and foliage quality. From my experience, it doesn't change the performance at all, so set it to Ultra. Cloud quality does as it's written, sets the render quality of volumetric clouds. Set to off, it completely removes volumetric clouds from the game. Only 2D clouds in the skybox are visible. It also seems to affect the overall lighting of the world. Setting it to low enables volumetric clouds and also affects the lighting. At this preset, the clouds are very noisy around the edges and are less defined. Medium and high simply improve their definition and make them slightly less noisy. On Ultra, they are finally completely noise-free. If I had to choose, I would avoid turning them off completely, since it has a big effect on the lighting. So go with the low preset, and if you have performance to spare, then go with Ultra. Motion blur was already covered previously, so we are going to skip to upscaling methods. For this video, we are going to stick with DLSS for the simplicity. Unlike in Helldivers, you can either choose a quality preset or set it to a set percentage. For those out of the loop on what upscaling in this case means, is it takes your resolution that you set the game to render to. In my case it's 4K, and depending on the preset you choose, the game renders at a set percentage of your original resolution. So just as an example, if I set the resolution to 2160p and the balance preset is 66% of my original resolution, then the game will render at 1440p. That image is then upscaled back to the original resolution. The lower the scale is, the better frame rates you can expect, of course at the expense of clarity. The huge benefit this has over just lowering your resolution is that the UI of the game is preserved at the original resolution, so any text that isn't a texture in the game world will stay sharp. During this testing, I was using the balanced preset. Anti-aliasing method gives you options for different AA techniques. Out of all of these, TSR proved to be the best option, with the smallest amount of problems. Honestly though, using DLSS still blows all of these out of the water. So if you're going to upscale with DLSS, then you don't have to give this too much attention. Hierarchical Z-buffer didn't do anything for me. You can try it if you have bad performance, but I would skip this setting. LOD dithering seems to be currently broken, because it doesn't do anything for many of the objects. Only thing that does seem to work with this setting are some trees and shrubbery. Otherwise everything still pops in and out of existence. It doesn't cost anything and doesn't change much currently, but I would keep it on at least for the times it works correctly. Contact shadows enable screen space shadows that apply to everything. They create shadows where normal shadows wouldn't be possible, like on my hand here, or on the grass here. It's a screen space effect, so it's slightly unstable and entirely depends on what the camera sees. Performance-wise, it's free, so I suggest just turning it on, since it adds a lot of realism to the game. As a reminder, this setting doesn't work when shadow quality is set to low. Our last setting is global illumination. This sets the quality of lumen, a ray-traced GI solution added in the latest update of the game, where they upgraded to Unreal Engine 5. It can be either software or hardware accelerated lumen, but in this case it seems to be software based. Unlike hardware-based lumen, this one can run on any hardware, even one that doesn't support ray tracing. Of course, it has its downsides, like being noisier than hardware lumen or the precision not being as good. I highly suggest at least turning it to medium, since it extremely changes the look of the game. From the better materials to proper indoor lighting and emissive lighting, it's worth the sacrifice to performance. That concludes everything that can be changed about the game. Now we can continue to the next section of this video, which is benchmarking all of the presets that the game has, but also how much the different APIs change the FPS we get from each preset. Of course, the benchmark is on the same route with the same conditions each time, so it fairly represents the performance you can expect. So, without stalling this any further, let's get to benchmarking. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. That's all from me. See ya.